You're listening to the Valley Current.
We have the right to remain silent. Or if you say can be used against you.
Can and will.
Can and will.
Thanks to everybody who is here. And thank you to Mr. Russo for joining us. We're really excited to have Mr. Russo, and you can introduce yourself much better than I can. But what I do know about you is that he's a prominent lawyer in the computer law and intellectual property space in that area. I don't have much law training, so I don't wholly know what that means. He's got a wonderful presentation here to wrap up this course. And we're really looking forward to hearing what you have to say. So right as we get started, we're just going to launch a poll. So if everyone could fill that out, that'd be wonderful. So I just launched the poll, and
I like that.
Folks can fill it out as you begin, or we can do it however you'd like.
We've all had a sabbatical here for a year and a half. So thank you for inviting me, and thank you for allowing me to take an hour of your time without lunch, because the Foundation for Creativity and Dispute Resolution, which is a foundation I started about 20 years ago, does provide some funding for Stanford carrying on events like this. And so I will be going through a few slides and some of this poll that's in progress, of which there's about, I think, 10 or so questions that we put together about workspan and so on, and healthspan and the like, are meant to get you thinking along the topics of what we'll discuss along the way. But before we get to that discussion, I'm going to try to do something slick that may blow up, but maybe it'll work. I want to dedicate this hour to Dr. Edward Bortz. Like you might say, who is Dr. Edward Bortz? Dr. Edward Bortz was the author of a book that I was lucky enough to receive from Dr. Walter Bortz. The book is entitled Creative Aging. It's the dad. Edward was the dad of Walter. Walter is my next door neighbor, which is how I got connected to his idea for starting a group that would have this course named Lifestyle Medicine, right? So I want to go back to Walter's dad, Edward. I'm dedicating the hour, maybe 58 minutes now, to Edward Bortz, Dr. Edward Bortz, the author of Creative Aging, a book that he wrote in the 1950s, maybe 1960s, we'll get the exact date, where he talked about how to age in a way that would lead to a successful feeling about both your health span and your lifespan, and presumably your work span, because those things are all interrelated with each other. And that's what the poll is getting at. And this is Walter, who is my next door neighbor. That's his home in Portola Valley. I live to the right in the middle of that cul-de-sac. And he and I would go out routinely for what was about a 3.5 mile round trip run every morning consistently, up to the point in which he had some medical issues that fundamentally stopped that from occurring. I want to say probably about, here he is wearing the computer law sweatshirt that I gave him. I want to say it stopped maybe about 3 years ago. Maybe my wife, who's here in the audience of one, will tell me I've got my dates wrong, but that's Portola Valley. That's one of the main streets, and I'm taking the picture, of course, so you don't see me, but he's wearing the computer law group sweatshirt. I want to also dedicate it to my mom. This is what she looked like on her wedding day. Her wedding was literally 70 years ago next month. Of course, her great husband, my dad, died at 90, so he's not here with us anymore. This is what I looked like when I was 5 in kindergarten with my little bow tie on. Who knew that I was going to be a lawyer? By the way, at that point in time, I thought I was going to go to medical school. So I actually, to some degree, am envious of all of you because I didn't take that direction ultimately. That's my next door neighbor friend, Geraldine, to my left, to your right, as you look at the screen. That's my lovely wife. I'm so glad that I didn't marry Geraldine. Instead, I met Lee. And there she is taking her blood pressure or something inside of a machine. I don't know what that is or where you are.
Russia.
And this is our daughter, Danielle, who's now married with a child. This is our sort of clan with various husbands and the like. This is my daughter, Anne-Marie, with her daughter, Paloma. And this is what those two grandchildren look like and what my mom looked like as a great-grandmother of two young great-grandchildren. And I felt so delighted to be able to find this picture. Of course, these are Anne-Marie's two kids. But here's the events that I want to frame for the topic we're going to discuss. My mom is still alive. She had a form of stroke that took her out through, the rescue team, quite a big group in Tampa, Florida. This followed the death of my younger brother, which came as a surprise. I learned a lot about death during that period and about what makes people comfortable because I spent a lot of time with him at his hospice in Florida and got to see sort of the process, the ultimate process of death, which I had not. Even though I had been an altar boy in grade school and had been to a bunch of funerals where I served as an altar boy, I never really fully appreciated what happens as death is upon us. But as I spent those last weeks with my brother, Richard, and various family members came to see him towards the end in that hospice setting, I learned a lot, some of which I hope to maybe impart some thoughts that will hopefully help with the bigger topic that we're going to talk about. This is what he looked like about a week before his demise. This is what my mother looked like after being sent into that hospital unit. And that's just sort of a backdrop to where some of this took me in applying some of these principles in a way that enabled me to use this last year. So COVID-19 for me, one of the questions I was going to ask on the survey was, have you gained weight during this last year? But I thought, well, a lot of people won't want to admit to it. I've actually lost 40 pounds over the last year as a result of the program that I self-engaged in when I saw all this death at the hospice and saw sort of how my mom was poorly aging from that beautiful picture of her on her wedding day, almost 70 years ago, and the way it's played out today. So I joined this club, which was open in Florida. The rest of the clubs, of course, in most other states were closed. It was a fairly well-run with appropriate social distancing in a yoga room, hot yoga room, which you might question. And I started to write on their blackboard various things. And this is me after 146 consecutive classes. And some days I did actually 2 or 3 classes. So I can tell you that I had never really before been a complete yoga enthusiast, but I was turned on to it and weight training and everything else. And the challenge of it, and so the flow that can come from mastering some of these positions. And so I'd leave you with some of these introductory thoughts about how, and Lee happily joined me in this effort. And I kept the blackboard going. In fact, the blackboard is pretty full. This is an old picture of it, of each class, and over time, how they were producing some value to what I felt was my ability to do lifestyle management for myself. We're going to talk about this triangle a little later. So I would measure also weekly, roughly, my blood pressure, which had been something like 168 over 100 or 90, pretty high blood pressure, got down to 114 over 66. and eventually 109 over 64. It's close to 100 at this point, maybe 100 over 60, like that. For someone who's over 65 years old, these, I'm told, are pretty good numbers. So the first funny joke, hopefully, is this screen. And I'm happy to send these slides to anyone that wants them, or maybe they'll be recorded with this recording. At age 4, success is not peeing in your pants. At age 80, success is not peeing in your pants. And you can see everything in between is sort of similar. And I think the good news for my mom is at age 90, which she celebrated just a couple of months ago, she's actually still in control of her faculties, and she's certainly in control of her mind. So that's kind of an introduction to, now I'm going to stop the share for a second to go back to, and I don't know if we've got everyone voting. I guess there's a couple of people who haven't voted yet, so maybe we'll just keep the thing open for a few seconds. And let me go to this next part of this, which is the actual presentation. So I call it 21st Century Lifestyle Management. I mentioned a little bit about myself. I have a law firm, actually 2 law groups that are related, Computer Law Group, which does mostly litigation, and Entrepreneur Law Group, which does mostly entrepreneurship, which means forming companies, doing deals for companies, helping companies grow, helping companies exit. And then Florence Venture Partners, which is a side venture firm that helps both of those firms.
And I think
probably means
that.
Now let's see what happens.
Poll so that we can see the results.
All right, why don't we do that? It's a good time to do that. So most people think their total lifespan will be 90 to 95, 46%. Some think they'll live to 100 to 105. No one is at supercentenarian, which would be 110. A few people think they would live 80 to 85. Okay, what's the next one? How much total lifespan? Looks like most people think it would be 80 to 90. Some think it's going to be worse. I guess a few people think it's going to be, or one person or two think it's going to be much lower. Okay. Interesting. It's a small sample, but it'd be interesting to run this across the whole medical school. Number 3, how much of a total workspan years do you believe you can work? So these numbers are generally getting longer and longer. I asked my dad at one point, he said his goal was to retire at 50. I think I asked him that when he was about 30. And he said, yeah, I'd like to put in 20 more years. And that's it. He actually worked until he was about 80. So, he started working when he was 15. So 65 years is where his number is. In general, it's getting more lengthy. How much money do you believe you will need to save for full retirement? Somebody thinks less than 100,000. That's in US dollars. Most people think it should be somewhere between $500,000 and greater than 2 million. What is your current chronological age? Some people think they're under 19. Is that right? Can that be right? Or 19 or 20? 22? I thought folks would be older. And then one person is 26. What do you think is your current, it looks like something got chopped here. Your current biological age, right? So those are 2 different things. How much sleep do you get per month? Some people get far less than others. Most people think it's under or roughly 8 hours. Some people think it's more. How much exercise do you get? There's a few people are getting 60 to 70 hours or more. And then there's a number of people that are getting far less. So it's almost 2x difference. Male versus female. Good. So I was explaining these various organizations. And as a result of some success, I created a foundation called the Foundation for Creativity and Dispute Resolution. It's really almost like a foundation for creativity because it's even broader. But our initial focus was using creativity to solve complex disputes. I mean, at the level that the courts truly have a hard time. and trying to drive into organizations and into the academic training of all future lawyers, all future law professors, judges, all future teachers, basically all students, creative problem solving and providing incentives for that. And what evolved as a result of discussions with Dr. Walter Bortz, my next door neighbor, was this notion of having an organization that would focus on the concept of a healthy 100 years. That is, to actually have lifespan equal health span equal 100 years or more. And most of the data that you just provided demonstrates that each of you think that formula is not likely to play out. That is, some of you think you can live to 100 years, but you don't think your health span will necessarily match that. And that tends to be what the data is like. So I did review some slides. I couldn't be at the previous presentations, the 8 or so previous presentations, but I did get some of the slides. And a lot of what's in lifestyle management has been well covered. The idea of going out to nature in varieties of different ways and doing it frequently and in a routine or ongoing way makes sense and should be part of what you do. What you eat is what you are. I guess that's a song as well. And the idea of having a healthy diet is very much part of a healthy lifestyle, no question. This new notion of mindfulness and self-compassion and how you look at the world and how you look. I keep saying to people, we should be blessed that we've taken this year off because we've kind of proven that we can survive a year that has seemed as though it's some sort of movie that is a horror film, if you want to view it as a horror film. I actually viewed it as an opportunity to make a lot of changes. And that's kind of the theme that the rest of the slides will present to you. So conceptually, the factor that I want to impress people today is your time is limited. We don't get perpetual life. As much as there's multiple finance companies looking for the perfect formula that will somehow allow us to live far longer than what might be called the outer limit, that if my good friend, Dr. Leonard Hayflick, still alive, still taking care of himself in his 90s, still very much active and writing articles, he would say the outer limit is somewhere between 110 and 120. There are a few edge cases where people allegedly have gone over 120, but he questions whether the data was accurately taken. And of course, lawyers like to talk about time as though it's money, but really time can't truly be replaced by money. It really is the scarcest resource that we have as humans. And if you put some math to it, because we don't really do it, what does it mean to say that you will actually have a healthy, 100 years or a healthy year even? What does that mean in number of months, 12 months to a year? What does that mean in a lifespan? What does that mean in days? You multiply and do the math, and you get to a set of numbers, and you can compute those numbers, and then you can turn them into hours. It's not a huge number of hours. It actually isn't. You're spending one of those very precious hours with me because I was given the chance to wrap up the seminar and to tell you more about what I do and to tell you more about how I think about using time to improve what I call your 7 essences. So I've been preaching this for a while, that I think there's 7 quotients that define how we improve ourselves and our relationships over time. So at the very foundation is HQ for health quotient, IQ for intelligence quotient, EQ for emotional intelligence quotient. And I use these S words, you'll notice they're in pairs, sane and sober is a way to say, both mentally sound as well as kind of physically sound. Smart and savvy is to talk about being intellectually smart as well as savvy about the way the world works. And sensitive and supportive is self-descriptive. And I usually talk about this as, if you're finding a match, do you just look for these three quotients, or do you look for more? And I've argued for a while that it's not just health quotient plus IQ quotient plus emotional intelligence quotient that makes for a match. There's something more, and it's something more that's hard to define, and improving it yourself. So another way to put this is, how could I have picked, if I could have, a better partner in the law practice or the venture firm or the foundation? And how could I have been a better partner to those other partners? Because the one thing that is true in life is it is really about partnership. And it really is about being able to use every talent that you have to produce a better contribution to both friends, family, and the rest of the community. And I think Maslow, many, many decades ago, said we're getting beyond these basic needs, physiological needs, although obviously climate change, safety needs, all of these various needs are being fulfilled, except the needs that we have to actually reach a form of self-actualization. You only have a certain amount of time to do it. In fact, a lot of that time is chewed up in things like sleep and like other activities, like caring for yourself, like the yoga ideas. And then the rest of it, because we're all knowledge workers in one form or another. I mean, maybe some of us do some side work that's not pure knowledge work, but most of what lawyers and doctors and architects and other professionals do is fundamentally thinking, some form of knowledge work, some form of applied thinking. And it spans many different aspects: seeking information, creating concepts, facilitating interaction, influencing people, just doing a bunch of stuff that creates value over a lifetime, and in presumably some leadership way, because most all of us that have had the privilege to go to universities and then graduate school or professional school are really leadership material, which is why we were enabled to go to those schools. So you don't get an awful lot of time to do it because you're spending a lot of time doing other things. So maybe in truth, your true workspan as a leader is under maybe 40 years, maybe at best case 40 or so years. And what's the essential elements of thinking about how you would spend that time as a leader and as someone who is helping build a group and relationships around you that have these 7 essences and perhaps more. So you have to look to people that have talked about these subjects, like Dr. Walter Bortz or his dad, Dr. Edward Bortz, before him. And the interesting thing is today, all of Wally's books and articles and eventually his videos and his audios will be readily available on his website. You can't say that about his dad's book. His dad's book is not in print anymore. If you're lucky enough to find the copy, maybe on eBay or Amazon through a used bookseller, it has a lot of interesting thoughts, but they're not really readily available, except to the extent perhaps Google may get it scanned in. And of course, health quotient generates longevity, but does it generate longevity with health span? Or, this is a picture. This is apparently a man who's lived to over 110 or 112, and he still smokes, he still drinks, and he still enjoys life. So it may be more about being happy. along the way, you want to build your sensitivity and supportiveness for others. And there's certainly lots of people that have written on this. And I like to say that you don't put your head in the sand. If someone needs help, you pay attention to how you can help them, and you act from a role of service and not from a role of regret or avoidance. And indeed, the research is there for sure that there's a relationship between HQ and EQ. And I have found that to be true myself in doing this sabbatical that this last year has been a form of sabbatical. I didn't give up the law practice. I didn't give up the venture practice. I didn't give up the charitable work. I just refocused how my time was used across those three, as well as in maintaining a view that HQ, EQ, and IQ were more important in my own life and engaging in a practice accordingly. So, part of what's going on is we're looking at a lot of screens all the time in different forms. You're looking at a screen now. I'm looking at a screen. You have to imagine that these screens are going to continue, but whether they're actually improving EQ or not is an open question. There are many that argue that we're not getting more emotional intelligence out of the way in which these Zoom and other media are presenting. But what is true is that if you do increase your EQ and you do increase your HQ, your leadership skills also to some degree will increase. And the reason for that is you become a role model for other people who also see that you are engaging in a course of self-improvement. Now, intelligence quotient you all have because you wouldn't be able to get into Stanford. The real question is, can you garner some additional savviness? Because you all have the smartness, but can you garnish some savviness in the way in which you traverse the world so that you can actually get to the expected lifespan and expected health span that you have? So there's another notion of PQ, which is sort of this idea of a passion for life. And in general, this is like goal setting and creating some specific and significant relationships with others. I like to cite to Dr. John Gottman, who talks about the importance of being aware of your partners, because your partners are going to play a big role in your level of happiness or unhappiness, as the case may be. The divorce rate in the United States has gone over 50%. Lots of people think it may go over 60 or 65% if the pandemic sort of reopens the courthouses, which it has, in ways that have people who have just lived too closely with each other to not be able to bear with each other. So this idea of PQ, or purpose quotient, or passion quotient, I sometimes call it, is to say you can define your life around a lot of things, but putting people first is probably the best way to think of it. So where that leads is to this idea of getting to a form of actualization. I sometimes call it flow, where you get to a point where you have pushed yourself and you might be in some level of fear or anxiety, but then you build skill. So I could not have done that yoga move within the first 30 or 60 classes. I just did not have the degree of stretch in my bones and in my muscles to be able to do that. But over time, that increased. And as I did further moves, which generated some anxiety, I built some skill in how I would be able to manage my body. The same thing is true for flow in knowledge work. You are mastering a topic in medical school and perhaps now mastering lifestyle management. And over time, you're going to have a better sense of how to produce the right balance between this idea of anxiety or panic if there's too much challenge, and a degree of avoiding boredom if, this is ho-hum and you've seen it all before and it really is not giving you any new information or any new value. So Dr. Csikszentmihalyi is a psychologist who's written about this, and he talks about, in general, folks avoiding this notion of boredom and apathy and moving in a direction of arousal and flow where you're mastering a particular topic. And the idea is to stay in this flow state. Some of us who are skiers remember.
Tune in next on The Valley Current.